Translator, Rethinking Pedagogy in Times of Generative Artificial Intelligence. Now, since we first heard of the appearance of ChatGPT and artificial intelligent bots, there has been a lot said on the media about the future of translators, about how the profession will one day or very soon become obsolete. There have been a lot of developments, and there has been a revolutionary impact in the field of higher education in particular. My study today will be about how to apply artificial intelligence, more specifically ChatGPT, to the translation classroom. Basically, this is based on classroom challenges. And what I've noticed is that there is an over-reliance on students for using these bots, not just in the translation classroom, but in the EFL classroom, other classrooms, there's an over-reliance to have these bots carry out their exercises, their research work. Now, specifically in the translation classroom, when I receive homework assignments, what is happening is that I'm getting word for word translation renderings. It seems that they are not reading the text properly. It seems that there's not an understanding of cultural context. There is the resorting to having these tools come up with the solutions without students recognizing or addressing, questioning the quality. They are not paying attention to register, not considering the target audience, the effects, the intentions of text. And so I ask, where are the translation literacy skills that we are trying to get across that are part of our syllabus? And so what can be done? This must be addressed in our classes. So my proposed approach is that we need to explore AI as a complementary tool, not a threat. We should introduce AI into the curriculum, using it as a tool that complements learning, but essentially fosters translation literacy skills. Now, if, for instance, the 2024 and 2025 European Language Industry Service, ELIS, highlighted that independent translators who saw Gen AI as a positive development used it in practical and empowering ways for tasks like terminology extraction, as a source for editing work, and even a means to reaffirm the value of human translation when clients encountered the limitations of AI tools. Now, what happens is they need to know how to use this properly. So my research questions are, to what extent can ChatGPT be effectively used as a complementary tool in the translation classroom? Can translation literacy skills explicitly be taught? And how does that impact students' translation performance? Is there a difference in outcomes between students who have a translation background or other backgrounds? Because if AI is translating text for everybody, will the results be the same for everyone? So class methodology was basically an interdisciplinary study where I used two first-year groups, one translation class, another a communication class at Universidade Católica in Portugal. I'm the teacher of the two classes, so it was very easily implemented in terms of calendar. The exercise took up basically 2 sessions. You can read more about it in my paper. In 15 minutes is quite limited time for me to explain it to you extensively. But basically, the exercise was that of having 5 or 6 texts circulate in each classroom. I have time to only present one in this research paper and presentation. All of them were confined to food. I used food as our text because food, in particular, cultural specific items. Because as we know, food is intertwined with human existence and holds a central place in all cultures. When we talk about culturally specific items of food, there is a whole individual and collective memory that arises. There is the recollection of smell, taste, that has to be reproduced and that it's culturally bound. And so up to what point does AI have that memory? Up to what point can AI transmit these feelings and memories in the text? So that's where I thought it would be an interesting exercise. So going back again to the methodology, we're talking, for instance, in the translation class, that I divided groups into two. They had one group where students had no access to online resources, nothing. Back to basics, paper and pen. The second half of the class, the other half of the class, could use all the resources they wanted, but the idea was to use ChatGPT. They could do post-editing, they could contribute with the translation, but they were supposed to be using ChatGPT as their reference. The same was duplicated in the media student studies class. So this is introduction to who the translation students are. They're taking a degree in applied foreign languages course with a specialization in translation, and the objective of the course is to have them familiarize with different text types, different challenges, and it is their first approach to translating. The exercise was carried out more towards the end of the semester so that I could actually have time to teach them about translation, the challenges, have time to practice on different texts to see exactly if that translation literacy was there. In regards to the cultural and social communication studies group, my communication groups or media group, their specialization is in media studies, but here I'm their English teacher. And so one of the learning outcomes here is also getting them to read text, interpret text, write text, and take register into consideration. So those were their essential skills to be taught. The text at hand was an article taken from The Guardian, and it was essentially about a very typical Portuguese pastry, the Portuguese pastel de nata. The text is very colorful. It brings up a food item that they're all very familiar with, that is part of their culture, but it's spoken in English. And it also brings up some challenges because there's a lot of comparisons going on. So the text says, calling pastel nata a Portuguese custard tart is a bit like calling a pasty a Cornish calzone. So again, we have references that are very close to home in Portugal, but then we have external references for the British culture. So let's see what happens. In Group A, our translation group, there was half of the group that did the translation on their own, the human translators. What happens here? As you can see, what I've highlighted in blue is actually creative aspects. There are no mistakes. There's a semantic equivalence throughout the whole text. And they very smartly said pastel nata with a tart nata. There are actually two types of pastries, different pastries. The opposition is a smart one because they look very similar, but they taste slightly different. The size is slightly different. So there is a good opposition going on. And so I would say that there is semantic equivalence from the two texts. And we had the pasty and the calzone, which again does not mean much to the Portuguese reader, but the translator here very creatively domesticated it by having a Porto wine with a red wine also from Minho. So again, same thing, but different. So he was actually able to find the equivalence. When we asked the translation group to use ChatGPT, we have tarte de crème, so all that's highlighted in red are translation errors. There are literal translation solutions that make the test sound like a translation. In the highlight yellow, there was an attempt to bring in a pastel, but then a pastel can either be pastry or other types of food, so it was very vague. And then to oppose it with a calzone de frango, they tried to domesticate it, but again, it wasn't clear for the Portuguese reader. And then what all the other references are exactly translation mistakes. Going into the human translation in the communication studies group, what we have highlighted in blue is something different. It's where the translator actually brought to the table something that didn't exist in the source text. So they're putting in like a narrative voice. They're bringing in a stronger emotional tone, more expressive. They're trying to highlight the uniqueness of the pastel nata, making it almost sound poetic. They're bringing in extra idiomatic expressions. Highlighted in fuchsia is, again, some minor semantic mistakes, but again, they are translating without any reference, without any resources. But again, we have a text that, okay, does sound a bit like translation, but it was a very good effort here. Now, when we go into the ChatGPT version, communication studies, all that creativity, all that transcreation that was going about has disappeared. We have errors also coming on. We have in yellow a calzone de Cornualha, which is a literal translation of the English text. So the culture-specific items that are being recognized are that are being rendered are not easily recognized by the Portuguese audience. It lacks cultural awareness. The text does not flow naturally, and it was a bit sloppy, and it required proper proofreading. So again, I'm interpreting this as an over-reliance of what the machine does. We don't need to revise, we don't need to proofread, and all the renderings are good. That was the first phase of the exercise, where each class had human versus ChatGPT. We put up this, we projected this. We had more time than we have here today, but we had time for a proper contrastive analysis of the different texts. I brought this up, we discussed this, we came to the conclusion that they were much more creative on their own and that they hid behind the ChatGPT versions. Second phase was to compare human translations between the translation group and the communication group. Again, what we see is we don't have a lot of mistakes. Again, the fuchsia are a minor semantic equivalence mistakes, but the blue always highlights what they're doing right when they're putting in their creativity, they're domesticating. Again, you see that the communication group basically takes off and starts adding more to the text. So what this reveals to me is that both translators are, again, there's no mistakes actually brought up in the text. So the translators are actually bringing up their translation literacy skills. They're showing me that they have learned the strategies, that they're applying the strategies, that they're doing proper proofreading. But something I wasn't expecting is that the communication group too is bringing up their media literacy skills, what they have learned about writing, what they have learned about register, taking the target audience into consideration, embellishing their text, bringing up more emotion. So this was something unexpected, but also very positive. What happens when we compare ChatGPT versions? Again, in both groups, we have literal renderings. We have text with mistakes because they're literal. There's no attempt to domesticate, to adapt the culture-specific items to Portuguese. And the blue is gone. Creativity, where there's no one bringing anything of a voice of either translation of translators or communication students at all. It's disappeared. So my conclusions are that students with formal translation training, taking their translator majors, may produce more accurate and nuanced translations compared to EFL students who may rely on direct literal translation, but they're also bringing up a lot of transcreation. They use the source text as inspiration. They're adapting ideas creatively to produce a version that felt original and contextually appropriate. AI just basically induced standardization for both groups. They limited lexical and syntactical variety. Students stopped making decisions, stopped creatively trying to find other solutions for the text, and there's an over-reliance on AI as authority. So instead of using AI as a collaborative tool, as something that will enhance their work, they're just heavily relying on it. This exercise brought the awareness that was necessary for them to see the difference of the quality of the text that were being produced in both classes. They learned about AI's limitations. They learned that translation literacy is a skill that is acquired and that machines are still yet to achieve. There is, and we come to the conclusion here, that there is a need for bringing AI literacy training into the classes. Let's learn how to use it. Let's see in what exercises AI can enhance students' work and where not, okay? Future perspectives. AI should be harnessed to support, not replace human translation skills. And we should, of course, all try as much as possible to explore other pedagogical practices to enhance translator training. And of course, other fields of study will all benefit from this. Thank you very much for your attention. If you'd like to contact me, here is my email address.